So thirdly, we want to look at the psalmist's way in testing. This takes us from Psalms 119, verses 69 to 71. It's quite interesting. Tests determine how well you understood the material, how well you could interact with it, and how well you could apply it. So let's learn from the psalmist his way in testing. The psalmist records a twofold reaction. First, his reaction to those who affronted him. Verse 69. His reaction to those who affronted him. You want to test a man or test his character is throw something heavy towards him and see how he reacts. Let's see how the psalmist reacted to those who affronted him. Verse 69. First, how he reacted to their sneers. There is nothing so demeaning than people sneering at others. In verse 69 we read, "The insolent smear me with lies." There's nothing more painful when people go around speaking lies about you. And the people who are so smart, they can make the lie look so good. And they try to make it very painless when they're spreading it around. But every lie about somebody is destructive because it's destructive to the person's character. A woman who loved to gossip about everybody went about and said some things about a fellow believer within the church. And this thing caught on, and this poor person who received this smear of lies about her was devastated. So this person realizes the destruction she had brought, comes to the pastor and says to the pastor, "Pastor, I did a wrong thing, and I've hurt an innocent person. What can I do to take back what I've done?" So the pastor said, "Take a pillow full of feathers, tear the pillow, and on a windy day, start spreading those feathers around." She couldn't understand what the pastor was doing and why this advice. All she wanted was a way out, for she could see the pain she had caused, and now the guilt was bothering her mind. Well, she went and did that. After she finished her task, came back to the pastor and said, "Please, now what do I need to do?" The pastor said, "Go and gather every feather you have let go in the wind." She said, "But that is impossible. I can never get all those feathers back." And the pastor said, "So this is the lesson you need to learn. What you've scattered out there can never be harnessed back." What a lesson. You see what the psalmist says to us in verse 69, "The insolent smear me with lies." So what should be his reaction? What action should he take? Listen to what the psalmist says to you and me. But, contrasting but with my whole heart, I kept your precepts. Instead of listening to the lies that's been perpetuated out there about him, he chose to hear what God would say about him. He says, with my whole heart, I keep your precepts, your truth, your law, your word is life to me. Not what somebody has smeared about me. That was his reaction. And I'll tell you, when you can react like that to something so devastating and destructive, I'll tell you what, you can breathe the oxygen God has given you, and you can move on with life with much better pace than when you get bogged down with the smear of lies. You see, when our character is smeared by false accusation, it can make a strong man crumble. I've seen it happen to some dear people. False accusation that were thrown their way, and all it did is make them crumble. You see, if you are only going to look into the mirror of false accusation that's being smeared around, I'll tell you what, it'll destroy you. And sometimes it's not the person, but the devil who comes to your mind and says, now where is your God? You prayed, you trusted, he never answered. Is he really there? Has he been there for you? Maybe he doesn't love you as much as he loves so-and-so, who had their prayers answered. The psalmist gives us a tremendous principles to live by. The insolent smear me with lies, but with my whole heart I keep your precepts, even when you cannot understand all that. You see, one thing that happened to Job, in all that Job suffered and all the accusations his friend brought to Job, Job, the Bible tells us, never sinned against God. He only questioned if God was there with him and for him. You see, you can choose to look into the mirror of false accusation or whatever lies has been perpetuated, or you can choose to look into God's mirror. And this is what the psalmist did. He looked into God's mirror and his life changed direction. His life direction changed. His life took on a new path. Sometimes I think many of us suffer in the church because we are so eager to hear what everybody's saying about us, instead of indulging in God's truth and hearing what God is saying about us, because that can change your direction and my direction in life. Not only does he see to their sneers, his reaction to those who affronted him, to their sneers, and then he goes on to their smugness. Verse 119, Psalms 119, verse 70. I want you to see this because it's so important. You know, sometimes you see people who have kicked you down, and when you're down, you turn and you look at them, and they're just smiling away. Isn't it funny sometimes somebody's behind your back, they've put you down, they've called you out in everything to everybody around you, and then they walk near you and they look at you and give you this bright smile. Listen to how the psalmist deals with that. In verse 70 he says, their heart is unfeeling like fat, but Another contrastive. I delight in your law. This concept of their heart is unfeeling like fat. It's difficult to explain that, but let me just try to see and hear what the psalmist is saying. You see, the Bible, when an animal was slaughtered, the fat was given as a sacrifice to God, and it had a good savor or smell or whatever. And so fat was good, but not in this sense as the psalmist puts to us. He said their heart is unfeeling like fat. Means their heart has become so swelled up with pride that they have lost feelings for, and a proud person only thinks about themselves and about their situation, their circumstances, their life. They never want to think about anybody else because they seem like everybody else is beneath them. Remember Satan? That's what took Satan down, was pride. You see, pride is deadly. Ask Satan sometime. But he'll never tell you the truth because he's still perpetuating that very sin in the hearts of the children of men and children of God. You see, God's truth brings us to know Him, and when we get to know God, we are also brought to conform to His character. Did you know that? And that's exactly what the psalmist is saying. He says, to their smugness, he said, their heart is unfeeling like fat, but I delight in your law. In other words, let me just put it in a very crude way. He's saying, fatten my soul with your truth. They have fattened their heart with pride. But I want you to fatten my soul with your truth. Wow, what a thought. There's a very interesting story in Judges chapter 3. I'm not going to give you the whole story, but it's about Ehud, a man who God will call, and he will go to Eglon, the king of Moab, showing a lot of cruelty to God's people. And the Bible tells us Eglon was a very fat man. And Ehud will go, to cut the story short, Ehud will go, and when they come near the idols, near Gilgal, Ehud will say to the king, I have a secret message for you, O king. And the king will command silence, and all his attendants went out from his presence. And Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in his cool roof chamber. And Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he arose from his seat. And what does Ehud do? He will take his sword and he will bring judgment on Eglon. But Eglon, the king of the Moabites, was such a big, fat man that the sword literally disappeared in his belly. It'll kill him. But what's interesting in verse 22, it tells us, and the hilt also went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of his belly, and the dung came out.